All right.
All
Hit me.
right, well, welcome everyone to our first episode of Let's Talk Blok. I'm joined here today with President Greg Senior, as well as Dr. Jon Sfura, who has been gracious enough to spend about 30 minutes with us talking about LokNBlok's testing procedures, some questions we've been getting in quite a bit as an organization. With that being said, I will actually let Dr. Jon Sfura introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his background. So, welcome.
Thanks, Bailey. Um, my background really involves working at Janney Elstner for, I guess it's now over 16 years, and worked on quite a wide variety of projects there. We do all sorts of different things for basically the built environment, where try to help our clients solve problems that they may have, or just answer difficult questions. And some of that may involve analysis, some of it may involve testing, some projects involve both. And we have a wide a variety of disciplines at Janney, not just I'm a structural engineer by trade. And we have quite a few of those, but we also have architects who are specialists in building envelope, roofing, historic preservation. We have material scientists in our company, and we have a large testing facility actually that was just renovated a couple of years ago. So we're able to do quite a lot, and we found that having a lot of those, I guess, skill sets in-house really helps us answer a lot of the questions we're asked, or solve a lot of the problems we're posed with. So anyway, I don't need to go on any further unless you have any questions.
You had a really impressive background. I know you did quite a bit of work with seismic, like earthquakes and such as well, more in like the construction there, residential, commercial. So I know you have a wealth of knowledge. I won't make you go back into all of that, but yeah, thanks for the brief overview. So with that all being said, Dr. Jon Sfura, how did you get involved with LokNBlok?
Well, that's, yeah, kind of a funny story, I guess. I think I was down in Louisville, Kentucky, actually giving a presentation on seismic design, and um, part of Greg's team actually was there at the presentation and approached me afterwards to look at LokNBlok, and they were at a stage in their development where they, I think, needed a company like ours to take the next steps. And so we were really excited about, learning about LokNBlok. And the more we, I think, talked with Greg and his team, we felt like we were a good fit, that we had the capabilities to help him in all the various ways that, various steps that needed to be taken. And so that's really kind of where things started with our relationship. So that was about, I think maybe 6 or 7 years ago now. So when we first met.
Okay, very nice. So, in terms of that, I know you talked to me a little bit about your background with the project, but can you talk specifics when it comes to testing? Maybe
Sure.
some of the testing standards that LokNBlok has already gone through, why and what is required to meet some of these standards, things like that.
Sure. Probably where I should start is the basis for the majority of the tests that we are planning to have performed or planning to perform is from an organization called ICCES. And ICC is it's a nonprofit association, nonprofit company that is associated with ICC, which is the International Code Council. And the International Code Council develops many of the the building codes that are used throughout the United States. And so ICCES develops what are called acceptance criteria, which are basically standards that outline test requirements for all sorts of different products, construction products that are used throughout the country. Seismic products, fasteners, concrete anchors, all sorts of different things. And so they help develop testing standards, and then they also perform evaluations, review the test results that are performed by companies such as LokNBlok or others. And so those acceptance criteria, so the particular acceptance criteria that we are using is called, it's AC447. It's the acceptance criteria for fiber reinforced plastic modular wall systems. And that was developed in consultation with, or can be developed in consultation with a report applicant such as LokNBlok, and then with input from other interested parties such as code officials and other people that may be interested other in the public. And so though that acceptance criteria is something that can evolve, I mean, there's one that's established now, and but at the same time, we can propose changes to that, which we have, and have successfully made changes that we feel are important, and those committees have agreed are better associated with LokNBlok. So that's really where the majority of our test requirements come from. And so the purpose of working with them, let me get to that, which is really probably the most important part. The purpose of working with ICCES is to ultimately receive what's called an evaluation service report, an ESR. And most construction products have one of these associated with them. Which is a document that presents the findings, the conclusions, and the recommendations from an evaluation. And while an ESR isn't necessary for a building official to approve the use of LokNBlok or any other product, it is widely recognized throughout the country, and it's very advantageous for acceptance by a building official, which is why most construction products perform this type of testing and apply for ESRs.
Okay.
So that was, I hope that wasn't too long-winded, but there is some background there, which I think is important to understand why we're doing what we're doing, why we're taking the steps we're taking.
No, that's some great detail. One of the questions I would ask with that is, so with these test standards, I know, and Greg, feel free to chime in here as well. I know that the block has been compared to that of like a concrete block, but just a little bit more strong or some different capabilities outside of just what a concrete block can do. So is the block undergoing similar tests to that, or if new tests had to be made for LokNBlok and PlastiBlok to have to go through?
Well, both.
Okay.
Yeah, both. I would say that you know, the tests that are included in well, again, since we're talking about LokNBlok, let me just talk specifically about AC447, the acceptance criteria for LokNBlok. There are, boy, I'd have to count. I'm probably going to guess at least 30 or 40 tests included in the acceptance criteria right now. Many of those are, or most of those are tests that were used for other types of construction products. So for example, many of the structural tests that we perform on individual blocks or block assemblies, such as like walls, those are tests that have been used for concrete masonry units, for CMU blocks, or other types of construction materials. So these tests aren't new. They're some of them are because some of them are included because LokNBlok is a fiber reinforced composite. So there are some associated with the fact that it's a fiber reinforced plastic, but again, these are tests that have been used for other types of products. So they're well vetted. That's why they're being included.
Interesting. Yeah, you had commented you worked pretty closely with some of those organizations and those groups, so I wasn't sure if there was some added tests that were involved. So thanks for answering that.
Sure.
Okay, so why would you say that the testing is required for a product like LokNBlok? With it being newer, I know there's a lot of different things that kind of will go into it just being a new product, but overall, why is testing required in this field?
Well, testing is, it may seem to people that testing is required for LokNBlok because it's a newer product, which is true. But testing is the basis of the design of any construction material. It's not unique to LokNBlok. Testing is required for every type of concrete, steel, wood, masonry type of construction component, etc. So there are many, and so I guess the high level answer to your question is, why do we perform testing? It's to determine what are the physical properties of a construction material and how does LokNBlok or anything else perform when exposed to loads or different types of environmental conditions, such as heat or wind or ultraviolet exposure or freezing temperatures. And all of those different types of conditions are included in the test protocol that we've put together for LokNBlok, and just like any other building material. So again, even building materials that are very well established, such as CMU or concrete or steel, still undergo tests, even when any kind of modification is made. So, and again, that's really the purpose of it. We're trying to determine what LokNBlok do, and that will be the basis for how we design with it.
Absolutely.
John, I know I've been kind of quiet here. I'm letting Bailey
feel free to jump in.
run the interview.
We won't kick you out, Greg.
I mean, it's more important for people to hear the questions that she's asking and hear from you what the answers are. Not so much important for me, but one question I did want to bring up, and you talk about the design requirements and the design criteria and the fact that our testing is moving to get us to that point to know how to design with it. I'd like to hear your thoughts or your statement on the fact of all the tests that we're doing. Are they pass-fail tests?
Sure. Yeah, it's I think probably a common misconception. Typically, or for the most part, no. Most of them, the large majority, are not pass-fail tests. Again, when we're trying to determine the properties of a construction material, or construction products such as LokNBlok, we need to test it to determine how strong is it, how stiff is it, and those are properties that we then use for design. So it's not, and so the testing and the design guidelines that then are developed really kind of go hand in hand. They are, and again, this is not unique to LokNBlok. This is common for any type of construction material, that the design requirements are based on the properties of that material. And so there are some that are pass-fail. There are a few. I think fire tests, for example, there are pass-fail requirements, but for the most part, they are not pass-fail tests. No.
Okay. because that's been a major concern for people that are looking at investing in people that are looking at being involved with LokNBlok, in that whether or not the test, is there something that we're going to fail at a later point of something that hasn't been completed yet, that would cause us to have to redesign, and that's been a major contention. So just understanding the process and understanding that it's all these tests are not pass-fail situations, that they're strictly inputs into the design, it is a huge benefit.
Sure, sure. And I mean, I guess just to provide a very simple example, I mean, one of the many tests we do is we'll perform a compression test on a block. We'll put it in a load cell and we will compress it until it fails. That's how we determine its failure load, its ultimate load. And I could, tell you what those design values are for, again, any construction product has a failure load. But then what we do with that number is really how we determine how we design with it. We apply factors of safety to that ultimate load, and then use that in determining, what kind of loads can be sustained by the blocks.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Greg, because that was going to be one of my questions I had too. Was, okay, so to someone who doesn't have the technical knowledge, I don't come from quite the PhD background that you come from here, but just how does that work? Because to me, I would have always thought it was a yay or nay. I wouldn't have realized that there's so many different levels. You're just seeing how to make the product better, even though you have guidelines to hit. So that was a good point to bring up.
And the guidelines really, the guidelines in the acceptance criteria really are there to, again, they primarily describe how do you perform a test. There are different requirements about how a compression test needs to be performed. And how long does the load have to be applied? All sorts of various things that probably aren't that interesting to people, but have been developed over decades of testing other types of construction materials. And so those are the types of tests we're performing. And then what do you do with it? What do you do with those results from the testing? How do you use those in taking the next step to design a larger building, and so again, it's the same process that's used for any type of construction material.
So then when you're doing these different tests, are you testing the block as a whole? Is it a piece of the block? Is it built as a structure? Can you walk me through what that would look like?
Absolutely. The short answer is all of those things. There are, so again, kind of referencing back to AC 447, I mean, that's really where we start, because we want to be recognized with an ESR for LokNBlok. But there also are other tests that we've recommended or may recommend Greg perform or LokNBlok perform that may not be specifically required. And so basically, the tests that are required are broken down into a couple of large groups. One of them is called are called component material tests. And those are tests where we take a small sample or a small, what we call coupon from a block. And so that coupon may be, we may cut it out. I don't have a sample here with me, but we may cut it out of a block wall of one of the walls of one of the blocks, or I mean, we perform a number of tests. It's not just a single one, but and so those component material tests are performed on small samples. We also perform tests on what we call assemblies, which would mean we take blocks and we create a wall. maybe a 10 by 10 wall. Again, there are specific design, or I'm sorry, specific test requirements in the acceptance criteria about how each test needs to be performed. But we would construct several walls, and we would apply different types of loads to those walls, such as gravity loads, vertical loads acting down, or loads out of plane of the wall to mimic, say, wind loads, and other types of loads. And then there are another group of tests that we perform are connection tests. And so that's really what it sounds like. We need to know how, if we use a fastener, such as a screw or a nail or a bolt, and we attach something to a lock and block, how will that perform? And again, those types of tests are no different than if we were attaching something to a 2x4. Those same tests are used for screws attached to, or nails, apply or installed in a 2x4 or a piece of wood or anything else. And then there are several other types of tests that are more oriented towards building envelope consideration. So those are the three groups in terms of structural tests, and then there are some building envelope tests that we need to perform as well. Such as we want to see if the block assemblies are can resist water penetration, air penetration, different things like that. So.
And you're able to do this all in that technical center that's at your place of work, right?
The majority of those tests we can perform in-house, yes. There are some, I guess, in kind of just fortunately, our headquarters is located right across the street from Underwriters Lab. And so they also are a nationally recognized company for performing different types of tests. And so there are a couple of tests that we don't perform in-house. We don't perform fire resistance tests or tests that involve burning of materials. We also don't perform tests related to thermal transmission. And so we would partner with Underwriters Labs to perform those tests.
Very nice. On a scale of 1 to 10, how fun is the test to see the load bearing? That one just sounds like it would be fun.
They are fun to watch. I mean, tests are always interesting. They're all new, and we're obviously here to get the results for LokNBlok, but at the same time, there's certainly a lot of excitement about the testing that we're performing. So
I feel like that would just be a fun test to see.
Absolutely.
So you've been a big part of helping develop some of these testing standards. You've given us a lot of really great information on that so far. Could you briefly explain some of the tests that have already been performed on LokNBlok?
Sure. The tests that we've performed to date primarily have been component material tests. And those, again, are tests on smaller samples of the block. And so the reason, there's certainly a sequence that goes along with this process. We needed to understand initially what are some of the basic properties of the block. And so we naturally would start with the component material tests. And so the ones that we have performed to date, let's see here, I think I have those. We perform component material tests in terms of tension, tensile tests, flexure, which is bending. We would fabricate small samples to load in bending. Shear, which is, again, for a non-engineer, I'm not sure how much sense that makes, but it's really a lateral test where we're trying to shear the material apart. And then compression and compressive creep tests on small samples. And we've also performed compression tests on full blocks, and then performed some preliminary compressive creep testing on full blocks as well. So those were tests that we could perform right out of the gate once we got started, that really gave us some of the basic information we needed to have to start to think about the next step. And so, you know, when it comes to taking the next step in terms of some of the wall assembly tests and the design guide, that's really kind of a hand-in-hand process. So.
Okay, so building off that then, you had mentioned there's quite a few tests that every material goes through, LokNBlok included within that. What main tests are still yet to come that we need to have done to be able to kind of progress to the next phases?
Well, there are several what we call wall assembly tests that need to be performed. And so again, that would be taking the blocks and constructing larger wall, like a 10 by 10 wall, or I don't remember the exact dimensions offhand. And then loading that in various ways, loading that in compression, loading it out of plane, basically laterally out of the plane of the wall, loading it laterally in plane, meaning where the load is applied along the plane of the wall, and then combinations of those different types of loads. Those are standard tests that are performed on concrete walls or CMU walls. And so go ahead, Greg.
I was going to say, can you talk a little bit about the load test that we did perform on the sample structure that we did? Because we had some, we had some favorable results in that.
We did. And so one of the, so that was a test that we performed that wasn't specifically required for the acceptance criteria, but in order to kind of get an initial understanding of how the blocks work and in a small structure, we constructed a small, I don't again remember the exact dimensions. I want to say it was maybe, I don't know, 20 by 18 by 12. Okay. A two-story structure and out of block and out of the LokNBlok, and we load tested it. And so there are load test requirements in the International Building Code, and we followed those and load tested it for a period of, I believe it was 48, 72 hours, something like that. So we tested for 100 pound per square foot design live load, which corresponded to an actual applied load of 160 pounds per square foot. And so we were able to not only get some experience in constructing with LokNBlok, but also that tested some of the floor framing to wall connections, and then the overall blocks wall assembly stability and compressive strength. So so that is and you were talking before about pass-fail tests. A load test is in fact a pass-fail test because you put a load on it and that you're trying to rate a structure for, and there are certain criteria that you have to meet, and we passed that test. So for the live load we applied.
Thank you.
Oh, Greg, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off if you were going to say something.
I wasn't. I just wanted to say thank you. I wanted to make sure that we discussed that live load test some.
Sure.
No, I'm definitely glad you brought it up. Well, Dr. Jon Sfura, we definitely don't want to take up any more of your time, but we sure appreciate you stopping on and talking to us a little bit more about your involvement with the project, explaining some of what the testing looks like to people who maybe aren't quite as technical and advanced as you are with your career, and kind of making more sense of what the overall picture is when it comes to testing. So I know that we'll definitely be having more episodes to come. Hopefully we'll be lucky enough to bring you back in. But with that, I just want to thank you again for joining us and appreciate it. Greg, do you have anything to add?
I would. Jon, thanks for your time. I know we've got some more questions, so I will get with you, and we're going to have to schedule part 2 of this.
Sounds good.
We've got more things that we want to address, and I know more things that, we were trying to touch on things that people have asked us over the course of the last several months. And knowing that we have some more questions for you, then we'd like to go ahead and, everybody that's watching, alert you that there will be a part 2 coming with Janney and Elstner and with Dr. Jon Sfura. Jon, I appreciate your time today very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.